Thank you, Mr. and Madam Arbitrator. My opposing counsel alleged that the IBA rules violate basic fairness, and that a written statement is just as valid as oral testimony. And my opposing counsel used Weinzheimer to support this. However, he has also said that it is in the best interest of the tribunal to hear witnesses give oral evidence to determine the veracity of the evidence. And also, as scholar Vider has told us, legal experts have noted that written statements being crafted by the party's lawyer often are nothing more than a special pleading that rarely contains the actual unassisted recollection of the witness expressed in his or her own words.
Counsel, not to be a jerk and ask you a question on rebuttal, but to be a jerk and ask you a question on rebuttal. It's fine and good what you just said from Weinzheimer and the other scholar, but why should we only do this for one side? Why is that fair? How does that respect your argument of fairness?
Well, we requested Mr. Short to appear, and because of this request and this tribunal's authority to compel Mr. Short to appear, we feel that it is extremely vital to a central point of what is being argued here today.
So you would have no objection to the other side doing the same thing as Mr. Long?
No.
Theoretically?
Theoretically, no. I don't know if that's the right answer for our side, but...
I don't know either.
Okay. But we do argue that when it comes to fairness, the claimant should have the opportunity to cross-examine Mr. Short in person, or if Mr. Short is unable to come, that the written statement, that this tribunal choose to leave out the written statement. And that's it for rebuttal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like a third rebuttal?
No.
Okay, great. In that case, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Arbitrator. I will move on to the two arguments on the merits. The first one is regarding late delivery. Since there was no valid amendment of the delivery date in the contract, as no amendment was recorded in writing pursuant to Mediterranean's reservation to Article 96, the delivery of the polo shirts was indeed late. An exquisite supply is entitled to damages for late delivery. The polo shirts were delivered by the respondent a full 5 days late on February 24th, portside in Oceanside, Equatoriana. Article 3 of the sales contract noted that delivery was to be portside or Oceanside, Equatoriana by February 19th. A timely and efficient delivery was a matter that was emphasized at the time the contract was signed between the parties. And even when Mr. Short called to inform the claimant of pending late delivery, Mr. Long again emphasized the importance of a timely delivery, although the contents of that phone delivery have no bearing on whether or not the timeliness of the contract, of the delivery was important. Article 10 of the sales contract even went so far as including an incentive clause offering the respondent a bonus for early delivery. However, it also included a provision stating that the respondent would be held to a penalty of 1% of the contract price per day late. Since the delivery was a full 5 days late, the penalty in accordance with the sales contract amounts to a deduction of 5% of the total contract price at $27,500.
Counsel, are you seeking damages beyond $27,500?
Yes, we are, as I will explain in the second argument on the merits. The claimant was entitled to and rightfully avoided the contract pursuant to Article 49 of the CISG.
I'm sorry, only in regards to late delivery?
No, we are only seeking the damages regarding the penalty for delay in delivery. Or also Article 28 of the CISG allows the claimant to, if the penalty clause in the contract is not found to be valid, the CISG also provides for the claimant to be entitled to damages for late delivery. I will now move on to the second argument on the merits, that the claimant was entitled to and rightfully avoided the contract pursuant to Article 49 of the CISG. The respondent fundamentally breached the contract pursuant to Article 25 of the CISG by delivering polo shirts that were linked to the utilization of child labor in its business practices. The contractual terms emphasize that respondent, as a supplier of goods to be sold to an Oceana Plus subsidiary, Doma Siren, must uphold the highest ethical standards in its business practices. The contract both expressly and impliedly bound the respondent to ethical standards that prohibited the use of child labor in any aspect of its business practices.
Where does it say that?
It says that, expressly states that in Article 12 of the sales contract that the respondent should adhere to the highest ethical standards as detailed in the policy of our parent company, Oceana Plus.
And where is it detailed in the policy of Oceana Plus that equates to child labor?
Oceana Plus is widely recognized for its, sorry, I apologize, Mr. Arbitrator, to answer your question. 4 years prior, in 2008, an audit was conducted, as well as several other contracts between the claimant, Exquisite Supply, and the respondent, Equatoriana Clothing. In those previous business activity that was conducted between the two parties, the respondent was very aware, and the claimant walked through all of the policy provisions with the respondent, which included labor standards. Furthermore, the Oceana Plus is widely recognized for its high ethical standards, which are prominently featured on its website and used in public relations materials. As explained in the April 8th Oceana Times newspaper article, Oceana Plus has been at the forefront of action to end the use of child labor, as has Oceana's entire business community and civic organizations. Quite simply, the use of child labor in any capacity at all is a major violation of the ethics policy. Furthermore, the prohibition of child labor is a fundamental ethical standard that is widely known and regularly practiced in the clothing industry. The CISG, pursuant to Article 9.2, treats standard industry practices as supplementary to the content of the contract. This caused a nonconformity in the intangible qualities of the polo shirt, which rendered the polo shirt completely unfit for distribution and resale in Oceana, which was the particular purpose detailed in the contract. Even though the respondent's business practices did not impact the physical characteristics of the polo shirt, the use of child labor in any capacity affected the reputation of the Yes Casual brand, and consequently the resale value of the polo shirts in Oceana. Massive damage was done to the claimant's parent company, Oceana Plus, through its connection to the respondent's use of child labor in its business practices, causing the loss of several seminal contracts within Oceana. Instead of bringing...
Counsel, who cares about Oceana Plus? Why should we care?
Mr. Arbitrator, you should care because two things were not done. The polo shirts that were delivered were not of the quality detailed in the contract. Furthermore, they were not fit for the particular purpose required in the contract pursuant to Article 35 of the CISG. The polo shirts were not fit for the particular purpose required because, as detailed in the contract and detailed in discussion leading up to the signing of the contract, the respondent was fully aware that the polo shirts that were to be produced were going to be, the purpose of the polo shirts was to be resold in Oceana.
What tells you that they were so certain they were going to be resold in Oceana?
Procedural order number 2.
They were...
Yes.
Told,
Sorry.
Yes. They were told that they were going to be resold in Oceana Plus. This was detailed when the negotiations, when they were contracted. Yes, the respondent was aware that the polo shirts were meant for distribution and resale by an Oceana Plus subsidiary in Oceania. Delivery of the non-conforming polo shirts constituted a fundamental breach under Article 25 of the CISG because of the non-conformity. Exquisite was substantially deprived of what it was entitled to expect under the contract, specifically revenue generated from the sale of polo shirts in Oceania. Instead of ringing cash registers, there were bursts of boycotts and protests outside Doma Siren stores. After the release of the television documentary and newspaper article, which links the Yes Casual shirts to the respondent's abhorrently unethical use of child labor, in some instances using children as young as 8 years old, This caused a ripple effect of appalled customers all around Oceania, leading to absolutely no sales of the polo shirt. This substantial detriment was completely foreseeable.
Is the statement, absolutely no sales of polo shirts accurate?
Mr. Arbitrator, I can amend my statement there. I would like to say that after the release of the television documentary and the newspaper article, once the ripple effect was fully complete within the customers of Oceania, people stopped buying the polo shirts because of their link, and as a sort of sign that these Yes Casual polo shirts were supporting child labor, even though this is something that the Oceania Plus is completely against. The substantial detriment was foreseeable by the respondent. It knew through previous dealings with the claimant that the use of child labor is not tolerated. Exquisite notified the respondent and avoided the contract pursuant to Article 49, and therefore is entitled to full reimbursement of the purchase price. Exquisite Supply was substantially deprived of what it was entitled to expect under the contract, and the detriment was reasonably foreseeable by the respondent. Therefore, the Exquisite is entitled to damages for actual losses and lost profits.
Counsel, one last question. If it's fair to say that the damages are reasonably foreseeable to the respondent, is it not also fair to say that the existence of this possibility was reasonably foreseeable to the claimant, given the audit history that you cited, the price of the shirts that was $50,000 less than any other bidder, below the cost in some cases of the original supplier? Did these not cause concern, even given the circumstances, and especially given the fact that there were alternative suppliers available?
Of course, Mr. Arbitrator, I understand your concern regarding this. We did, according to our policy, conduct an audit in 2008 where there was suspicion, though we did not have actual knowledge of child labor being utilized. What the respondent informed us was that the manager who was in charge of such activity was immediately fired, and they rigorously informed us that child labor was eliminated within their business practices. Therefore, we relied upon the respondent's assurances that there was no child labor. Also, we did have several offers that we could have utilized, but given the time constraints and the emergency situation that we were presented with and the past business history that we had with the respondent, we chose to go ahead with them. Thank you.
The respondent has two responses. The first will be that late delivery did not occur, and the second will be that child labor was nowhere near found in the production of the clothes. The first point is that the claimant not only amended the various documents surrounding the contract in order to obtain delivery, but they also accepted the delivery of goods, in this case the polo shirts, without complaint. Specifically, on the 9th of February 2011, a phone call was made between Mr. Long and Mr. Short. Mr. Short at the time being the respondent's representative. During that conversation that took place on 9 February 2011, the two gentlemen sufficiently and made it clear that an amendment would take place modifying the original date from 19 February 2011 to 24 February 2011. And let me explain why this truly was an amendment. Mr. Long himself, Claimant's Exhibit 2, paragraph 6, says that, and I quote, there was little he could do except to accept that delivery would be late. In fact, as Mr. Arbitrator mentioned, there were other options that the claimant could have utilized in order to obtain the polo shirts, possibly in less than 5 days late, or what is illustrated as late. But they still stuck with us. And in fact, if we look at the relevant provisions of the CISG, we can no doubt construe that the telephone conversation between Mr. Long and Mr. Short was not only an offer, but it was also accepted. As I said, Mr. Long accepted the close on the 4th of February. Now,
But counsel, what was his acceptance of the amendment specifically?
may you repeat that, please?
You said he accepted delivery, but I don't think you mean that that's the acceptance of the amendment, or do you?
There's 2 points that I'm trying to make. The first is that there was an amendment, and the 2 parties agreed upon that, and it was a telephone call. And in that telephone call, the implicit assumption is that the sales contract was going to be agreed, and I'll explain to you why it had to be agreed. A letter of credit can only be changed by the claimant. The respondent has no authority to do that. So, in fact, we had to fulfill our obligation and produce the close, and deliver the close, even if it was a few days late. Because if we did not, we would be in breach of the sales contract and ultimately the letter of credit, which we assumed was amended. Now, if we look at Claimant Exhibit 2, paragraph 5, it actually discusses the letter of credit that we're discussing, Mr. Arbitrator. Because we expected it to be amended. And in fact, if the claimant had no intention of amending it, and if they in fact did not amend it, then they would be in violation of their contractual duties. But let me get to the proposition that the claimant proposes, that in fact the conversation on 9 February 2011 was just informative. It was just for fun, in other words. That's not the case, and I want to explain why. In order to satisfy the applicable legal standards, we, the beneficiary, we have no power. That legal authority and power remains with the claimant. And if we look to the unit draw principles, in fact, 1.8, comment 2, and I quote, if a buyer does not insist on strict compliance with the delivery schedule, the buyer cannot later seek damages for the seller's late delivery. And in fact, at the time, no fuss was made about the late delivery. In fact, late delivery is not even an issue. What is an issue, and which is my second proposal, or second response to the proposal that claimant raises, is child labor.
Before you get to that, can I just ask one quick question? So you would hold that the incentives clause and the penalty clause it contains do not apply solely because of amendment of contract? Is that right?
That would be the respondent's stand.
Okay.
Okay, so the final prong is child labor, and I would like to divide that by discussing the real contract or the real provision that we have with our suppliers and with respect to Oceana Plus Enterprises. And the contract stated explicitly that we conform to the highest ethical standards in the conduct of their business. And I'm emphasizing there because the claimant would like there to trickle down the supply chain to avenues that are not even controlled by us. And this is unreasonable. It's unreasonable because a reasonable interpretation would understand that the conduct of their business is between the two contracting parties. In this case, claimant, Exquisite, and myself, and EC. Now, if we look at the scope of influence, we cannot even control things that are beyond our first degree supply chain. They would like us to control not just the first degree, but the second, the third, and the fourth. The claimant proposes that a breach occurred. I'd like to start off by saying there is no breach because they got the goods that were an extraordinary quality that conformed to the contractual obligations that we made with the claimant. As such, there can be no fundamental breach, and I will explain to you why. In order for the claimant to successfully argue under Article 25 of the CISG that this breach, or this fundamental breach, substantially deprived the claimant of what it expected, they have to show that it was foreseeable to us. And this is where the claimant is unable to adequately present the foreseeable factor. And if we look at this, I'll explain to you why quite simply. If we look at the pricing, and in English and in the Western, we have a saying, red flag, that if it's too good to be true, the price, then something might be wrong. And so, if the claimant proposes that it was foreseeable for us, this argument should also be made to them, that, hey, you should have been on guard because we had an audit 4 years ago. And if they were truly worried about satisfying the highest ethical standards required in Oceania, then perhaps they should have performed an updated audit. But sticking to the substantially deprived point, the prong, and that we failed to meet this with respect to the polo shirt delivery, no doubt the goods had to be produced in an ethical fashion. And there's no doubt about that. And I'll explain to you why. Schweinzer, in Schleitrim and Schweinzer, state that the goods delivered to Oceania only have to meet consumer preferences. In fact, what that stands for is that as long as they're, and forgive me if I'm using different nomenclature, but it's that the goods not be hazardous, they not violate war crimes. If they meet the consumer preferences with respect to quality, that's the most important thing. And they were specifically produced for Oceania, and that's why we negotiated this contract. And that's why if you look at the purpose of the Claims Exhibit number 1, we satisfied every, in terms of the quantity and even the delivery.
Counsel, is it your position that consumer preference, as defined by Mr. Schweinzer, cannot include ethical standards?
We have to bring him in here because I don't know what his opinion is.
That might be difficult.
Speaking of consumer preferences and nonconformity, it's important to realize that every organization, in this case Exquisite, they have certain expectations. And indeed, these expectations should have been known at the time when we're offering potentially non-conforming goods at a price that is substantially lower than what is available on the open market. And this is not me, but I agree with the scholars in that if it's too good to be true, a red flag is raised. Regardless of these facts, Exquisite disregarded its responsibility and proceeded without conducting the additional audit. And now they come retroactively saying, you messed up. We didn't mess up, they did. Now, we could not foresee this detriment suffered by a third party. Remember, we only contracted with the claimant. Thank you.
Rebuttal?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Arbitrator. I'd like to use my 1 minute of rebuttal to respond to 2 points. Number one, opposing counsel alleged that there was an amendment to the contract, and we disagree. Merely agreeing to the late delivery does not amend the contract. When Mr. Long said on the phone conversation doesn't have any bearing on the actual delivery date reflected in the contract, we urge this tribunal to respect the reservation made by Mediterraneano that all amendments to the contract must be in writing. And number two, with regards to the use of child labor, the respondent mentioned different degrees of business and also a lower contract price. I don't know if he's himself trying to admit to the fact that, you know, child labor was utilized. The prohibition of child labor is a fundamental ethical standard that is widely known and regularly practiced within the clothing industry. As the sales contract expressly stated in Article 12, the highest ethical standards must be maintained, and the use of child labor in any part of the business practices of the respondent, of which the respondent has full control over, should have is absolutely not tolerated, and it is, in short, a major violation of Oceana Plus's ethics policy. Thank you.
Is there a rebuttal?
No.
Okay, thank you.